The minute Bradford slammed his designer sneaker on the boardroom table and announced, "What we need is disruptive momentum," I knew we were officially circling the drain. I'm Richard Kellerman, 48 years old, and I'd just spent 3 hours untangling a vendor mess that would have delayed our delivery schedule by 6 weeks, quietly saved the quarter without needing applause or a victory lap. Meanwhile, the CEO's son, fresh off some wellness retreat in Aspen, had birthed this cursed new title of Chief Innovation Officer and was suggesting we gamify compliance. I wish I was making that up. Gamify compliance. This was a Tuesday. By Thursday, he was asking if we could monetize downtime by incentivizing task ambiguity. Someone actually snorted in the back of the room. I didn't laugh. I'd seen this movie before, and I knew exactly how it ended. Some overprivileged kid tries to duct tape buzzwords onto operational systems he doesn't understand. When the wheels fall off, they blame the guy who warned them about loose bolts in the first place. I should probably mention I'm Director of Strategic Operations. Been here 11 years. Former Navy, trained in systems thinking and process integrity. I don't speak unless it's necessary. I don't panic unless the server room's actually on fire. And I don't indulge executive egos unless it's specifically written into my contract, which it isn't. What I do is keep things running, smoothly, legally, and with as few lawsuits as humanly possible. Bradford thinks operational hygiene means wiping his phone screen with his sleeve. He came back from that Aspen retreat with a whiteboard, an executive title, and tried to schedule weekly sync sessions on Fridays at 5 p.m. The kind of guy who calls Outlook a legacy platform and once submitted a PDF by screenshotting it and pasting it into a Google Doc. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm exhausted. The first time he interrupted one of my meetings, he didn't even introduce himself. Just barged in, clicked present on the conference room monitor, and started showing a pitch deck full of stock photos of mountain climbers. One particularly terrifying slide said Beast Mode Ops in Comic Sans font. When he finished his presentation, I stared at him for a solid 5 seconds before asking, "Is there a business request embedded somewhere in any of that?" He blinked twice. "I'm ideating. Try doing it silently next time." To his credit, he didn't retaliate immediately. Just logged off and then immediately sent a feedback survey to my direct reports, asking how adaptable I was to new paradigms. The truth was I'd been shielding him more than fighting him, cleaning up his messes behind the scenes, reformatting his meeting notes before they hit the investors, reassigning people he'd mismanaged before they could escalate complaints to HR. I didn't do it for him. I did it for the company, because at the end of the day, someone had to keep the lights on. But it wasn't just Bradford. The whole leadership culture was rotting from the top down. Charles Ashford, the CEO, had completely checked out, too busy grooming his legacy and his golf handicap. He kept saying things like, "Bradford's ideas are fresh and we need to modernize the hierarchy." But modernization without foundation is just a PowerPoint presentation waiting to collapse under its own weight. We had contracts teetering on legal technicalities, vendors operating without updated statements of work, and a massive investor milestone coming up that required 6 layers of regulatory oversight, all of which lived invisibly on my desk. It wasn't ego, it was infrastructure. I didn't talk about what I managed because the whole point was for no one to notice when it worked perfectly. That's what scared Bradford the most. You can't dominate what you don't understand. You can't replace what you don't know exists in the first place. So he started poking around, questioning my meetings, reassigning small tasks to his buddies, scheduling alignment reviews with my analysts. Once he walked by my desk and muttered, "Deadwood doesn't prune itself." "Cute," I said without looking up from my screen. I grew up around lumber yards. Deadwood's not what clogs the system. It's the fungus that thinks it's the tree. That got his attention. He stopped walking, turned around, and gave me this look like he was trying to decide whether I'd just insulted him or complimented him. Classic Bradford. Couldn't tell the difference. By the first week of the quarter, I could smell the smoke curling under the door. He wanted a confrontation, but I don't yell. I don't slam things around the office. I don't fire off angry Slack messages at 11 p.m. like he does. I wait. I document everything. I prepare for every possible scenario. My Navy training taught me that panic kills more people than actual emergencies. When systems fail, you follow procedure. When people fail, you document it and move on. When privileged kids with daddy issues try to burn down functional operations to prove their worth, you let them dig their own graves and then you hand them a bigger shovel. Bradford was digging fast. His latest brilliant idea was renaming our entire compliance function to Integrity Operations, because apparently when you don't understand a system, your first instinct is to give it a new name and hope no one notices the foundation cracking underneath. The man thought rebranding was the same as rebuilding. He thought changing the PowerPoint template would somehow modernize 11 years of carefully constructed operational processes that kept us profitable, compliant, and lawsuit-free. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my name wasn't just on the organizational chart. It was embedded in legal documents, regulatory filings, and investor agreements that went back to our last major funding round. Not Director of Strategic Operations, not whoever's currently in charge. My actual name, Richard Kellerman, and when someone thinks they're untouchable, they forget to check if the wires they're cutting are live. When the call finally came, when Bradford decided to go full power trip during our most critical client presentation, I didn't even flinch. Because when someone thinks they're untouchable, they forget to check if the wires they're cutting are actually live. It happened during our Q3 alignment call with Lockwell Defense, the one with the $40 million milestone tied to deliverables, where every single word had to be calibrated like we were defusing a bomb. We were literally mid-sentence discussing compliance thresholds with their procurement team when my cell phone started buzzing, 3 times in a row. Same number, no voicemail, no context whatsoever. Just Bradford pounding on the door like an impatient toddler. I muted myself, stepped away from the microphone, and answered because I assumed someone had either died or a server had caught fire, or God forbid, he'd tried to upload another GDPR compliance document to TikTok again. "Richard," he snapped. No hello, no preamble, no basic human courtesy. "Why aren't you in the brainstorm?" "What brainstorm?" I asked, already knowing this was going to be spectacular. "The branding alignment session," he said. Like I was the complete idiot here. "I scheduled it 5 minutes ago. I need you in the room right now." "Bradford, I'm on a call with Lockwell Defense. You personally approved this agenda yesterday." "Well, this is more important," he spat back. "We're reimagining the visual tone of our entire strategic roadmap." I paused, gave him a full beat of silence to let that sink in. "You want me to leave a $40 million milestone compliance review to discuss fonts?" "They're not fonts," he said, and I swear on everything holy he said this with his whole chest. "They're emotive vectors." I stood there in the hallway watching junior employees scurry past with their heads down, pretending they couldn't hear this conversation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps. Somewhere in the distance, a printer was jamming for the 3rd time today. "Bradford, I'll follow up with you after this call concludes." That's when he completely snapped. "No, I'm the CEO's son. When I call, you answer. You're fired. Do you hear me?" Fired. For a moment I just stood there, listening to my own heartbeat thudding against the silence on the other end of the line. Fired. Like it was that simple. Like I was a malfunctioning piece of equipment he could just unplug. Like 11 years of keeping this place running smoothly could be dismissed by a tantrum from someone wearing $300 sneakers to a business meeting. I didn't respond. I didn't indulge him with an argument. I hung up without saying another word, walked back to my desk, unmuted myself, and rejoined the Lockwell call like absolutely nothing had happened. Closed out the final scope discussion with their team, smiled politely when the client said, "As always, Richard, your team makes this incredibly easy to work with." After the call ended, I sat there for a few seconds, long enough to hear the air conditioner cycle on and the distant sound of some junior project manager trying to print a 400-page PDF on the wrong printer tray again. Then I opened my email inbox and searched for Funding Agreement, Clause 7, Oversight Disbursement. There it was, the email I'd flagged months ago. The line I knew by heart because I'd written half the language myself during contract negotiations. All capital disbursements are contingent upon active oversight by the registered operational officer. Any change to the designated party must be filed and accepted in writing by the board and all lead investors prior to disbursement. I hit forward. Subject line, FYI. Body, just in case. Sent it to my personal email account. Nothing dramatic, nothing elaborate. Just documentation. Then I stood up. I didn't slam any drawers shut. Didn't stage some dramatic exit scene for the office gossips. I didn't even clear my browser history because I had absolutely nothing to hide, and they had everything to lose. I grabbed my jacket, my half-empty coffee mug that I always meant to wash properly, and a small cactus I'd somehow managed to keep alive longer than 3 different CTOs. Walked past the front desk, nodded at security, held the elevator door for someone from HR who didn't even look up from her phone. The strangest part, nobody stopped me. Not a single word from legal, not a Slack message from HR, not even a "we need to talk" follow-up from Bradford himself. I might as well have been a ghost already. By the time I reached the parking lot, the afternoon sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt like someone had dragged a giant rake across the sky. I sat in my truck for a while with the engine off, phone face down on the passenger seat. There's a peculiar kind of peace that comes from being completely underestimated. While they're celebrating your absence, patting themselves on the back for removing an obstacle, they don't realize that the timer has already started ticking. And the fuse? It's been lit for months, 3 days. That's exactly how long it took for me to realize I'd been fired completely unofficially. No email from HR explaining termination procedures, no exit paperwork to sign, no COBRA insurance packet showing up in my inbox like a greasy hangover reminder, just complete silence. Corporate coward silence, like they were hoping I'd just evaporate into the retirement fog with a polite thank you card and a sheet cake they forgot to order from the break room. But I'm not built for passive disappearing acts. I don't vanish quietly into the night. I observe, I document, I wait for systems to reveal their own weaknesses. And boy, were there weaknesses everywhere I looked. The morning after Bradford's spectacular phone tantrum, I made my usual coffee in my kitchen at the usual time. Still waking up at 5:30 a.m. out of pure muscle memory, I didn't cry into my scrambled eggs or rage against the corporate machine. Just sat at my kitchen counter with my daily planner open to a calendar that technically no longer applied to me, staring at a to-do list full of meetings I supposedly wouldn't be attending. Then I opened my laptop and decided to do a little investigating. First stop, the investment dashboard. The company had granted me a fairly aggressive equity package after our last acquisition, negotiated back when Charles was too busy playing golf with board members to pay attention to operational details. Bradford wasn't even in the corporate picture then, probably still doing keg stands in some fraternity house that smelled like Axe body spray and broken dreams. I logged into the portal, fully expecting to see alerts, revocation notices, maybe a big red terminated banner flashing across the screen. But no, everything was completely untouched. Vested options still active, no termination flags, no pending action notifications. The system still thought I was gainfully employed. Very interesting. Next, I checked my work email from my personal phone. Pure curiosity, not desperation. Still active. Still no official message from HR about termination procedures. My calendar hadn't even been cleared. I was still listed as the primary meeting host for Friday's operational forecast review with the leadership team. I actually laughed out loud, a real laugh, short and bitter but completely honest, because Bradford hadn't just fired me, he'd essentially ghosted me. He wanted all the dramatic satisfaction of wielding power without any of the administrative follow-through that proves it actually happened. That's not leadership, that's corporate theater. From what I could piece together through LinkedIn posts and carefully worded text messages from a few brave souls still trapped inside, Bradford was already strutting through the office like a peacock high on retail therapy, bragging to the marketing team about removing friction points, which apparently meant firing 3 experienced directors and replacing them with what he called agile-focused shadow pods. Don't even ask me what that means. I'm pretty sure he got the concept from a Reddit thread about startup culture. I didn't reach out to anyone directly, didn't try to stage some pathetic comeback or claw my way back into their good graces. I just watched. Quietly monitored Slack channels I still had access to through forgotten permissions. Watched a junior compliance analyst post increasingly panicked messages about missing chain of custody documentation for one of our larger vendors. Watched Bradford respond with a GIF of someone literally pouring gasoline on a desktop computer. Hilarious. Meanwhile, vendor invoices were getting kicked back left and right because Bradford's college buddy, the new senior process optimization specialist, didn't understand how to approve anything above a certain dollar threshold. Finance was completely bottlenecked. Procurement started sending just checking in emails more frequently than usual, which anyone in operations knows is corporate code for we're about to have a complete meltdown. Then came the real kicker. An email from investor relations asking for clarification on milestone documentation procedures. Apparently, nobody had bothered to realize that I was the only person officially cleared to verify certain compliance thresholds for regulatory purposes. It wasn't just some arbitrary title thing. My actual name was legally embedded in the agreements, not Director of Operations, not whoever happens to be in charge this week. Richard Kellerman, specifically. I watched Bradford give a LinkedIn Live presentation about flattening organizational verticals and leveraging digital maturity frameworks. And I swear on everything sacred, he delivered this presentation while standing in front of a whiteboard that had Richard equals legacy bottleneck scribbled in red marker behind him. Strong leadership, really inspiring stuff. People started reaching out through back channels, quiet messages mostly. The compliance lead, "Hey, do you happen to remember where the Q4 documentation archive lives?" The CFO's assistant, "Do you know if we ever properly refiled the oversight designation clause after the merger paperwork went through?" One particularly brave soul from investor relations sent me a meme of a dumpster fire floating down a flooded street with the caption, "Today's workplace vibes." I didn't respond to most of these messages. Just archived them systematically, let them stack up like dominoes balanced on a slick floor. Because here's the fundamental thing about corporate power that most people completely misunderstand. They always assume it's physically located in the room, sitting at the conference table, wearing expensive suits and talking loudly. They never imagine it might have quietly walked out the front door without slamming anything. And I hadn't slammed a single thing. I just left. Calmly, professionally, fully aware that they'd pulled the pin on a grenade but were still holding it in their hands. The real fun started with something seemingly insignificant. The weekly operational summary email going out to the wrong distribution list. Not a huge catastrophe on paper, except it accidentally included Q2 financial projections that hadn't been board approved yet, client names that were under strict NDAs, and one absolutely spectacular typo that listed our total project backlog as $18 instead of $18 million. Bradford thought it was hilarious when someone pointed it out. Said it gave the company scrappy startup charm. The legal department didn't find it quite as amusing. Neither did the investor relations team, who suddenly found themselves fielding 3 increasingly frantic phone calls from our European investors, asking if the company had suffered some kind of catastrophic financial collapse overnight. By the following Monday, visible cracks were forming in the foundation. Deliverables were running late. Internal escalation tickets started piling up like autumn leaves. Our client portal, which I had meticulously integrated with a self-healing error handler system, began spitting out access denial messages for top-tier customers. Why? Because Bradford's optimization team had attempted to streamline the user experience flow by rewriting the entire permissions architecture using ChatGPT prompts. I could have diagnosed and fixed the problem in maybe 20 minutes, 15 with proper coffee. Instead, I sat on my front porch in a comfortable hoodie, sipping lukewarm coffee, and watching a determined squirrel attempt to bury what looked suspiciously like a McDonald's chicken nugget in my flower bed. Oddly therapeutic, actually. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it roll to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text message came through from a number I recognized. Janet, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored back when she thought KPIs were some kind of protein supplement. "They're telling everyone you retired," the message said. No context, no emojis, just that stark sentence hanging in digital space. Apparently, in an all-hands meeting that morning, Bradford had announced that I'd transitioned out gracefully after a distinguished career and that new leadership was taking operations in a bold, new direction. No mention of being fired, no paperwork trail, no official clarification. Just a soft eraser rubbing me out of corporate history, like I was some dusty trophy being moved to storage. But they forgot one crucial detail. I had built the shelf they were all standing on. That same afternoon, I got another call, this one from Philip Santos, an investor relations manager I'd worked closely with for years. Smart guy, definitely not prone to panic attacks. The kind of person who color codes his email folders and reads SEC filings for entertainment. He left a voicemail that was exactly 6 words. "Did you sign the verification packet?" I hadn't signed anything. Because nobody had sent me anything to sign. Because nobody except me knew they needed it in the first place. Here's what most people don't understand about corporate compliance. Every quarter, for our primary investor to release the next funding tranche, we had to submit what's called a milestone verification packet. It's not just some simple checklist you fill out on a Friday afternoon. It's a formal legal document confirming that all deliverables, contracts, and regulatory compliance thresholds have been properly met according to federal guidelines, And it absolutely has to be compiled and signed by someone with verified oversight authority, someone whose actual name matches exactly what was filed with the original funding agreement 2 years ago. Not Director of Strategic Operations, not whoever happens to be in charge this week. Richard Kellerman, my specific legal name. That crucial detail lived in one very boring line buried on page 47 of a very boring PDF that everyone stopped reading after the third round of legal revisions. Bradford, naturally, had no idea this requirement even existed, but someone in the corporate food chain was finally starting to figure it out. The email from legal counsel arrived at exactly 10:12 a.m. the next morning. Subject line sanitized to the point of unintentional comedy. Friendly documentation request. Time sensitive. The body was pure corporate theater, overpolished and desperately trying to hide panic beneath layers of professional courtesy. It started with "Hi Richard, hope all is well," then stumbled awkwardly into the real request. Could I, at my earliest convenience, affirm procedural oversight for the prior quarter in alignment with historical documentation protocols? Translation. Please sign this compliance memo we frantically drafted 5 minutes ago and backdated 3 weeks to cover our mistakes. The attached PDF was already filled out with my name in the signature field, but conspicuously lacking an actual signature. I stared at it for a full minute, closed the file, reopened it just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, then marked the entire email thread as unread and dragged it into a folder I created specifically for this occasion. Nice try. By lunchtime, 2 additional messages had arrived. One from the CFO, polite but increasingly desperate. Another from Bradford's executive assistant, who clearly had no idea what she was being asked to chase down. "Hey Richard, just circling back on that quick doc sign-off Bradford's hoping to present Thursday. Thanks." That quick doc represented federal-level regulatory compliance tied directly to a $40 million investor funding release. It wasn't a permission slip for a field trip, it was the last remaining lock on a vault door, and I was the only person in the building with the key. That afternoon, the lead investor's office placed a call directly to Charles himself, not to the CFO, not to some middle management buffer. According to someone still brave enough to text me updates, the conversation was cordial but unmistakably tense. The request was simple. When exactly would the formal milestone verification be submitted so that the next $40 million disbursement could be processed on schedule? Charles, probably sipping his third green smoothie of the day while pretending to understand Bradford's latest whiteboard masterpiece, confidently deferred the question to his son. Bradford, riding high on his own sense of untouchable authority, told them everything was completely under control. He even had the audacity to say that operations were running better than ever. I genuinely wish I could have seen their faces when he said that. At 5:03 p.m., the investor's legal team formally requested a comprehensive clause review. That was the precise moment when the background music stopped and everyone suddenly realized they were standing in a minefield. Clause 7.3 of the original funding agreement. It was never designed to be dramatic, just standard governance boilerplate that nobody bothered reading after the third revision cycle. But I had read it. Multiple times. I had memorized every word because I'd helped write half the language during the original contract negotiations. It specified my exact title, my legal name, and the precise regulatory language tying milestone verification to a designated operational oversight officer, singular, not plural. Any change to that designation required formal board approval and documented consent from the lead investor, filed at least 10 business days before the scheduled milestone review. They had filed absolutely nothing. I hadn't officially resigned. They hadn't terminated me through proper channels. No successor had been formally named or approved. They had fired me through a phone call tantrum and then tried to pretend I had simply evaporated into retirement. Now the only thing standing between the company and their $40 million cash injection was a single PDF document that required my personal signature. The irony was absolutely beautiful. A compliance clause, boring and completely overlooked by every inflated ego in that building, had now become their entire company's kryptonite, all because they couldn't be bothered to follow their own procedures when throwing tantrums. I wasn't excited about this development. I wasn't even particularly angry anymore. I felt something much more powerful. Cold, calculated vindication. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a completely different office. Smaller, cleaner, designed with actual intention rather than ego. Natural light poured across a conference table that didn't need to seat 15 insecure executives with territory issues. I placed a single folder on my new desk, labeled in understated gold foil. Continuity and control, building companies that outlast their founders. The investor walked in without his usual entourage, just a brief, professional nod of acknowledgement. "We'd like you to lead the operational rebuild," he said, glancing around the modest but functional space. "No family names this time." I nodded once. That was enough. I didn't need the apology or the ceremony. I'd been through fire and paperwork and came out forged, not burned. The details came later through quiet channels. Bradford had been quietly scrubbed from all company systems. No announcement, no LinkedIn farewell post, no carefully worded departure email. Just gone, like he'd never existed in the first place. Charles had stepped down to focus on personal interests, which everyone knew meant golf and damage control. The $40 million disbursement went through the next day. Amazing how fast corporate wheels turn when the right signature appears on the right document. I hung one item on my new office wall before I settled in. Not a diploma or industry award, just a printed transcript of that Tuesday phone call. Bradford's voice immortalized forever in 12-point Courier font. "I'm the CEO's son. When I call, you answer." Underneath it, I stuck a bright yellow sticky note, positioned just slightly off-center. Not anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd fired the one person holding their entire compliance infrastructure together, then spent 2 weeks in corporate hell before begging me to come back and rebuild what they'd destroyed. But this time, I had the authority to do it properly. No more entitled kids with daddy issues, no more buzzword salad replacing actual competence. I'd seen this movie before, now I was directing the sequel.